So, you want to start playing Flesh and Blood. Yeah, me too. But I think it's important that we discuss a few things when it comes to the competitive side of Flesh and Blood. Now, lucky for you, there are a lot of fabulous precon decks for you to pick from and get a good feel for the game. You've got the initial block, which are coming back out, or I think have already been reprinted, right, as part of the little history sets. So we've got the 4 first initial precon decks, along with another 4 for Arcane Rising, and then you have all the precon decks from the latest sets, these new battle boxes that feature 2 decks for you to play competitively with someone, and I believe there is still the welcome deck free to print on the Flesh and Blood website. But in saying all that, these decks, if you were to take them to a competitive event, to be honest, you probably can't hope to place well. And the simple reason for that is equipment. Now, equipment, by and large, is going to be the biggest factor for Flesh and Blood. So, in my hands, I have a Perch Grapplers. These are a Majestic Ranger Equipment leg slot card. Now, these are about $10, I believe, in this normal basic version. And this is the cheaper side. So you can probably imagine that if you want some of the most prettiest versions, if you will, the upstart cost to actually play Flesh and Blood, well, that's probably the most challenging aspect for anyone who's getting into the game. Now, in saying that, before we actually fully approach the subject, I do want to just reiterate that these precon decks are a wonderful place to start. I strongly believe that if you want to play Flesh and Blood, the first thing and your priority is to find the hero that you resonate best with, right? So you've got a huge array of different people to pick from, and they all have different play styles that you might want to check out and, see who you feel is most suitable for the type of games and matchups you want to play. Because again, there are a lot of different heroes to pick from, all who have slightly different card lists, slightly different decks, and slightly different mechanics. So it's really important that your first step is to really figure out who you want to play and then work around them to build your collection and actually invest in the cards that, again, you will need as staples to play competitively. Now, while we could just crack these open and start going through some cards, lucky for us, the actual Flesh and Blood website has a wonderful deck list archive. So this shows all the decks from major events as well as their placings, which is fantastic, because if you really want to understand the competitive side of Flesh and Blood, well, this is probably the better place to start, taking a look at the decks that are actually highly competitive. And sadly to say, there is one thing you'll probably notice across the board. So if we take a look at these first, second, and third placing decks, all featuring different heroes, well, there's a little bit of commonality, okay? So we've got a Ferendel Spring Tunic, we have another Ferendel Spring Tunic, and what would you know, another Ferendel Spring Tunic. So Spring Tunic is probably one of the most iconic and by far the biggest staple card in Flesh and Blood at the moment. And rightly so, it has a substantial price tag attached to it. So any competitive deck that you really want to build outside of Draconic, so these 2 heroes here, Dromai, Fae, and I guess the novelty Emperor deck, are going to feature a Spring Tunic in some form. It is just the straight up best chess piece and resource generator for the game that it is essentially an auto include. So that means that any deck you want to make with a Ferendel Spring Tunic is probably going to cost you a pretty penny, right? If we look it up on Google, we can go to TCG Player and we can find that even on the more accessible side of things, so I believe the cheapest version is Crucible of War Unlimited, well, it's still going to set you back $200, right? So you can almost think of this as the base cost for the majority of decks. Okay, every deck is going to be 200 plus if you actually want to, achieve a high competitive standing. Now, I'm sure there are a few decks that manage to run without some of these core staple cards, but by and large, to get a better grasp on the game, well, you're going to generally pull from these highly competitive decks, and again, they feature a Ferendel Spring Tunic, and if you read its effect and you start playing the game, you'll understand exactly why this card is so important to the majority of decks. So this is where the argument for Flesh and Blood being an expensive card game to get into really comes from. It originates from the equipment side of deck construction. Now, I'm not saying there's not powerful, normal playable cards, right? We have other staples that you can probably find in the majority of decks, like Command and Conquer. There should be Enlightened Strike. There we go, perfect. What about you? Can we point out there's another Command and Conquer, all of which are powerful cards, but they're not the end and be all of any deck, okay? Flesh and Blood is designed in a way that really rewards strategic play. Now, these cards are strong, but your strategy can't be just to play around these cards. It doesn't work for Flesh and Blood. You need to have all these alternative strategies set up through different combinations of cards to really be successful on the competitive side of things. This means that the actual deck list, while being, tiered to some degree, will have a decent amount of interchangeableness or variations where you can run slightly cheaper sets of cards. Now, for equipment, that's simply not the case. You can think of equipment as almost passive abilities or add-ons to your hero's own ability, right? You start with them on the board as game pieces, and you can utilize their effects whenever you want. And therefore, it's really important that you have the best abilities for your deck accessible to you. And for the chest slot, you'll generally find a Spring Tunic, and in a lot of the other slots, you'll find that certain legendaries and majestics are core to a competitive deck, and any of those cards will have a decent price tag attached to them, especially the legendaries, because legendaries only have two variations. They have a rainbow foil and a cold foil. Now, Spring Tunic had a normal printing, since it was such a desired and staple card, but for the majority of other legendaries, you're only going to find them in those two variations. For instance, Crown of Seeds, if we were to check out this price, the unlimited version is going to set you back $60. Now, the rationale for this cheaper price is that it is now a niche equipment piece, right? So it is only applicable to Earth. Therefore, since it has a limited amount of heroes it's accessible to, it is on the cheaper end of the legendaries. But if you were to add these types of prices together, 200 for a Spring Tunic, 50 for another legendary, 50 for another legendary, a few other cheap cards, you're probably looking at, upwards of 300. And while this might seem expensive to, build a competitive playable deck when compared to other card games, a rationale that you have to keep in mind is these are cards that you will generally have available to your hero of choice throughout the entire lifespan of Flesh and Blood. They don't cycle away as standard sets come out, because there is no rotational sets in Flesh and Blood, and they're not really at risk of being banned, because Flesh and Blood, generally speaking, is very nuanced with their banning, okay? So these cards are actually very usable for the long run of the game. If you find the hero that you like most, investing in the equipment that is best for them, well, chances are you're not going to have to recycle or swap out those bits of equipment. So yes, equipment is costly, but at the same time, it is also a powerful core of any deck. So personally, investing $300, $400, $500 into the core pieces of a hero that you enjoy, I think that is a welcome price, especially when you are not at a substantial risk of needing to suddenly U-turn and create an entire different deck. Generally speaking, the hero you pick to play will still be playable. Yes, there will be matchups that are unfavorable to you. There'll be matchups that are favorable to you. But all in all, investing in the hero you are treating as your identity is a solid investment, at least in my eyes. Okay, so I think this is the correct rationale to keep in mind if you do want to play competitive Flesh and Blood. Now, there is going to be a hierarchy to different heroes depending on the actual cards or the state of play. If there are more tempo decks in the game, if there are more sort of stall, slow type decks, different heroes are going to be favored in those circumstances. If we look at the results of a lot of the recent events, we can see Oldhim, Uzari, Lexi. But then if we scroll down to another event, we have Uzari, Katsu, Bravo, right? So there is constantly a applicableness to running whatever hero you like. Flesh and Blood is very much a game of identity. You need to find the hero you like. This is going to be the hero that you will most likely carry through your entirety of play. Yes, you might have another character that you like, but generally speaking, it is an RPG, if you will. You find the hero you want to roll, the hero who has the ability you like most, and the deck style and the play style that you enjoy, and you're going to stick with them. So therefore, investing in a deck for them for competitive play isn't sort of like a different card game where new metas evolve. Generally speaking, the equipment that you put a down payment on, if you will, will still be useful to you in the long run. And investing in a core collection for Flesh and Blood is the costly aspect. As new sets come out and new cards come out, it's not too hard to pick up the staples that are important to you. But don't have the mentality to think, well, these are all the first place decks, so I want to play Uzari, I want to play Oldhim, I want to play Fae. No, you need to find your identity and then build your core collection around that hero. And in the long run, that's going to be the most cost-effective way for you to get into Flesh and Blood and for you to play competitively.